So, hi, Michael. What was your first Hello World?
So my first Hello World, I guess it was in Turbo Pascal several years ago. But I remember also with a friend of mine, we did some basic programming.
Mhm.
But so I guess this was my first Hello World, but my first a bit more than Hello World was then with Turbo Pascal.
When was it?
Oh, try to remember. It was, I guess, around 92 or 93, I guess.
Okay.
I'm not completely sure. So it was regarding or after in the church or so. I get my confirmation. I don't know what's the English term for this. There I bought my first PC, and then shortly afterwards, I guess in the first year, I got more interested in regarding how this PC works and so on. And then I got from a friend this Turbo Pascal stuff, and
Okay.
then try to start with this, and I just try to remember what day this was, but around this time.
Okay. And what PC was it? You remember that?
And it was a 286 with 8 megahertz and a turbo power or turbo button, then with 16 megahertz at the end. But
Okay.
to be honest, don't remember how much memory it has. But
Okay.
I guess something around 1 megabyte or so.
And which brand was it? Was it IBM?
I know it was a Compaq, I guess it was.
Oh, Compaq. Okay, interesting. They were nice back then. And what? So you created your first what in Turbo Pascal? So I guess your first Hello World was in BASIC. So what you did in Turbo Pascal?
Yeah. There was some small installer script around this because I had some friends which were not so familiar with the PC, and we wanted to share some, I would say, games and so on. And then I mostly tried to do some installer with Turbo Pascal so that they had just to insert the disks and everything was copied and so on. So it was very, very basic.
And why you got interested in programming? So.
Oh, to be honest, I could not completely say this because it was just, I was always interested in this technical stuff. And then one of my cousins had a C64. I was also interested in this. And then it was that I said, okay, I want something like this. I then annoyed my parents with the Switch. And then at some point in time, they said, okay, with the money you get with your confirmation, you can then do what you want. And then they decided I want to have some sort of PC or some sort of a computer. At this point in time, I want more some C64 because of the games. But then my parents got convinced that they should buy me a PC, and then it ends up in this 286. And as told, I was just then curious how this works and also with the DOS and so on.
Okay.
And then I somehow started to read more about this, and then started with this.
Okay. Were convinced by you or by someone else?
No, by someone else. So
Okay.
it was really, I was first more interested in the games.
Okay.
And not so more in how the thing works. But then when I have it, I was more and more interested. But to be honest, it was also when I got a bit older, the interest got less. And then it just started around when I was like 16 or so.
Okay.
When I was more and more interested also regarding what job I want to learn. And so this starts then again to get more and more interesting for me. And so I get also more in this programming stuff.
Okay. And what was the most impressive stuff you did with Turbo Pascal?
I tried to do a own game, but so a jump and run.
Uh-huh.
But it never really started good. So I just get it a bit to say you could navigate something on the screen and did some jumps, but as told, it was then for me during this time too complicated, and then I completely stopped.
Okay.
And then when I was back 16, 17 around, I was then more get back interested in this. But then regarding creating HTML pages.
Oh,
and this time,
could you figure at least jump and run?
So no, not completely. So.
Okay. What was the name of the game? You probably had.
Well, finding good names is the hardest part. So it never got a real name.
Oh no!
So it just started with it.
Usually, as teenager, you would start with a crazy name and then start programming.
No, it was the other side around. So I started programming, but never got to a name.
So after Turbo Pascal, you started hacking HTML?
Yeah, but it was really just doing, I don't know, Dreamweaver was, I guess, the tool.
Exactly.
Where you had more this, what you see is what you get, and then started to create the pages. And during this time, I was then also more interested because with this, what you see is what you get editors, I had always the feeling what I see is not really what I get.
Yeah.
And so I get more interested in how this again works. And from this, I got then to the point that I had decided that I want to study something this direction. So really, computer science.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I started to study, I started to work with Java.
Okay. And where you studied?
In Karlsruhe. And,
Karlsruhe, okay.
Meanwhile, it's named, I guess, the University of Applied Science.
Okay.
So
and as a kid, where you were based?
Also near Karlsruhe.
So cool.
I never really left this region. So
yeah, nice region. And you started. So you did some HTML with or without JavaScript. So at the beginning, it just was plain HTML or a little bit.
Just plain HTML.
Okay. And then you
started really a lot with tables.
Oh yeah, tables were essential back then. Without tables, there was no layout. But
yes.
And you started. You jumped immediately to Java. So you did Turbo Pascal, HTML, and then Java.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, and what you did with Java back then?
I was doing the university or the study that we had a lot of practical stuff where we had to implement some. So the first steps in programming languages was then with Java. And then when we had to implement some also web-based services or applications, it was mostly then with Java. I guess during this time it was with structs.
Exactly.
And also the more basic stuff, so like parser programming or compiler stuff was then with C and C++.
Okay. And what was your very first impression of Java? So if you saw Java the very first time, you liked that? You knew what it is, or what was the very first impression?
I really liked it. So because I had during this time mostly did the comparison then to C, C++. And for me, it felt far easier to getting things done or getting things to work because you had not to take care of that much with C++, with the whole memory allocation and the cleanup and so on.
Okay.
And Java was more for me just one.
Okay, cool. So, but you also learned C and C++ at the university, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, so what was the most impressive thing you built with Java then? Back then.
So during university,
yeah,
we had some management system for the students where you could register yourself for courses and then manage in which course you are. But this was so during this time or afterwards, I would not say it was that much of impressive.
Yeah. But it was Struts based, web based, right?
Yeah, completely Struts based.
You ever did, you ever saw at the university public static void main, or you started with servlets?
Yeah, we started with public static void main. So it was the first steps. So it was very basic in the first 2 semesters, so that we really started with the loops and the conditions, and therefore our professor then started with so we now create a main method and really do something. It was very practical in the first years.
Oh, okay. And you ever saw Swing or AWT?
And yeah, I had some course with UI programming, and also doing this, it was then my first practical semester, where I implemented for a company for a half year some UI tool for them. It was a combination of they provided patch for their system, so they had in their system which they have, it was some sort of content management system. And they replaced then between updates or patches just the class files, and therefore they used them for the version management. It was CVS during this time, and also they merged during this time between SVN, and then I should then load the UI and the short minor tool, which then you could select between different commits, and then based on this commits you create a patch file, which should then be applicable by another tool to the installed server environment.
Okay, nice.
And so in this, I learned a bit about Swing and AWT.
Okay. And when was your university? 2003?
2002 to 2006, so 4 years.
Okay. So, and what happened afterwards? So, or a different question. Were you involved in side projects during universities, or had you some programming related hobbies, or was just university for you?
Yeah, so my side project, so for myself, I had not that much because during this time I was really focused on university and getting out with my friends. And also during this time, when I did something with programming, it was mostly related to a company. So I worked then during my study at I guess it was 2 companies during this time. Also, first at the first company, and then second in the second company, where I really tried to get more practical stuff. And also there was...
Which is a very good idea. And what you did then? So what you built for the companies?
And so the first was just the UI, which I mentioned, and this patch tool. I created, or I started during my practical semester, so during 4 months. And then afterwards, they offered me a student job where I could work so around, 20 hours per week, where I then worked and finalized the tool or did some features, added some features. And then afterwards, after half a year, I decided I want to see another company and then find a small startup, which offered a position regarding how it was. They wanted to see if something like struts or Java server phases, and one other framework was also in. They wanted to have a comparison because they wanted to. No, it was not Wicked. It was something different, but I could not remember.
Okay.
I'm not so sure. And they wanted to see which of the frameworks they should select to move or to create a web UI for their service, which they offered.
Okay.
Because before they had some UI, I guess it was Swing based.
Okay.
But they wanted to have this then also as a web UI, and then decided, okay, as example, at the end, in the worst case, they run a web server or something like Tomcat just on the user's machine, and then the web UI is used from there, or it's hosted on some server and then used from the customers on the server. But at the end, they wanted to have a web UI, and I did then the evaluation and started with the first version.
Okay, and which one? What one? You remember that?
I started or I selected together with the colleagues. We decided to select Java server phases.
Yes. This was the version 2 or 1? You remember that?
I'm not sure. I guess it was already 2, but I'm not completely sure. Yeah.
Okay. So nice. And what happened after the university? So you started with you went with the startup. So or what was your?
No. I had or at our university there was some special. I think how to name it. So I don't know. Do you know Steinbeis as a foundation?
No. Steinbeis is a funny name. It's like, a stone biting.
Stone bite, yeah.
So Stone Bite Foundation, right?
Yeah. So it's a bit, I would not say bigger, but not small foundation. It's, I guess, located in Stuttgart.
Okay.
And there's also a Steinbeis University in Berlin.
Okay.
And they had so one of their things they wanted to achieve is a collaboration between companies and universities.
Okay.
And therefore they created the Steinbeis GmbH, so that it was easy for professors to have a very small company or like a company at the universities with just students or Finnish students, where they then work together to bring the new stuff learned or teach in the university back into the industry, and get also the feedback from the industry what is currently used by them, or what's the trend which is used, to have there some exchange. Okay. And I was doing my diploma thesis, I was then asked by my professor, because he was one of the, I guess he was doing this time 3 professors which are responsible for this. And he asked me then if I do not want to join.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, this sounds interesting, because it was always that it was projects in the area of Karlsruhe,
Mm-hmm.
and always around, so mostly a half a year, so from 4 months to half a year, where then do some consulting or projects at companies.
Okay.
And for me, this really sounds nice, because for me, this was the opportunity to see for more companies and work in different projects in a small amount of time.
Okay.
And also one of the concepts of this Steinbeis GmbH was that the people normally work for around 2 to 4 years and then switch to the industry if they like.
Okay.
But so I guess when I joined, the colleague which worked the longest time for this Steinbeis GmbH, so at least in Karlsruhe, worked there for 3 years and also left when he was around 4 years. But when I then remember back, I also left, I guess, after 2.5 years. And so this is, as told, quite common there and also expected. And so it was really nice to learn a lot of different companies.
Okay. So it seems like a nice idea, the stone biter thing.
Yeah.
Cool. So, and you also left Stone Bite?
Yes. I left them as told. So after, I guess it was 2.5 years. So
Okay.
it was my fourth project, where I was in a company in Karlsruhe. So I guess I can name this company. So it's the 1 or Eins und Eins in Germany.
Uh-huh.
And
This is a
there was
subsidiary of T-Mobile or T-Online, right?
no.
Telecom.
United Internet.
Okay. United Internet.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I guess one more the competitor to the Telecom.
Okay.
The Eins und Eins.
It confused them. So United Internet, you are absolutely right.
Yeah. And this was my last project. I was there for a project. And then they asked me if I do not want to stay.
What you did
make me
there?
an
You
offer.
remember that? What was your job?
So my first job, they had the migration project,
Mhm.
because they bought a competitor, and then it was the migration of their data into our system. It
Okay.
was a half-year project, and I was there with the project team was also from other companies, because it was a bit short-term, and then they decided to get external colleagues which
Mhm.
help for the project, because they had not enough resources. And so I was in this migration project, was really interesting. And then afterwards, because I worked then with the team, so it was the team responsible for the call or the phone numbers of the VoIP system.
Mhm.
And they offered me, oh, you can work completely at this team regarding them to implement the business cases and be responsible for the whole system managing the phone numbers.
And it was Java based.
Yeah, it was completely Java based. So during this time when I joined, it was all EGB 2.1.
Mhm.
So it was a bit messy at some points. But then also, I guess it was after I was about 1 year in this project, we started migration to EGB 3.1.
Which is nice.
Yeah, it was completely far better to say. So really, 2 or the EGB 2 was really not too wide, or you need something to generate the whole stuff.
Yeah, Xdoclet or something like this.
Yeah.
So you, was it around 2006?
It was a bit, I guess, 2.8, 2.9.
Okay.
Was already 2.8. It must be
But
around this time.
I started most of the migration in EGB 3 in 2005. So Java 5 became available, so you could just migrate to the lightweight stuff. 14 years ago.
Time passes.
Yeah, nice. And do you stick with 101? No, you.
No. It was more regarding private reasons.
Okay.
Because of my wife, and then we had to decide a bit if we want to move when we now want to get married, and then we had to decide if we want to move closer to Karlsruhe or closer to Heidelberg. And then we both tried to find a job in this, because my wife worked in Heidelberg, I in Karlsruhe. We lived somewhere in between. And then we checked who get better at job in the area of the other person.
Okay.
And I was then a bit faster. And so we moved both more close to Heidelberg.
Heidelberg is a bit nicer, I think, right?
Yes, I like it more. So the city itself
Yeah.
is really nice, and in comparison to Karlsruhe, even if based on my history, I will always be liking Karlsruhe. But to be honest, Heidelberg is a bit nicer. Yes.
Exactly. So I think I remember there's like a small castle or something. So in Heidelberg, right?
Yeah, the Heidelberger castle is, I guess, very famous, especially and the
philosophers.
tourists. Yeah, you see really a lot of tourists when you go to Heidelberg.
Yeah. And which job did you got at Heidelberg? So what was it?
And so my job which I did, so I've changed, not changed, go to the SAP.
Okay.
And also because it was, I guess it was also this, there was a JUX conference at 2012. Where I guess we both meet shortly, but it was just around, I guess, 2 to 3 minutes where we meet after one of your presentations.
And why we met? So you had questions, or what was the deal?
No, it was because of one of my colleagues.
Okay.
I just try to remember. I guess it was regarding the JMS 2.1 specification, or the JSR related to this, because one of my colleagues at the 1&1, Rüdiger Zudona.
Yeah, he was very involved in the messaging stuff, and he was involved in the spec. And we had he talked, all the time about messaging back then. I remember.
Yeah. Because also there we had our in the 1&1, because he was some architect there during this time. Responsible for several teams, and I was as a developer in one of those teams, and we really talked a lot about how it could be, or how the new JMS specification should look like, because we used it a lot during this time for the communication between our services, but still then JMS 1.0, and had a lot of stuff where we thought we could improve it, and also had some internal libraries which already brought some improvements, but Rüdiger was always eager to move this into some standard. And so he was then in this JSR, and I was together with him at the JUX, and he met with you, and I was also beside of him, and we had a short talk.
Okay.
But yeah.
And what was the result of the talk? You remember that? So what was the topic?
No, I completely not remember. I just remember that we meet one, so he talked with you. I guess something I asked you, but it was just one minor question. So during this time, so you were during this time, so you're still a bit of an idol for me.
Oh.
But during this time, I do not dare to ask that much.
Okay. So, interesting stuff. So there's a really small world. And I know you from Twitter because of your icon. Someone to reply, and this is the Meebo icon. So, and I say, okay, I had no idea who you are, but it's interesting feedback. So this is, and now I know who you are. So probably not from Faces 7 years ago, but I remember the context. And I remember talking with Rüdiger several times about JMS and challenges. And for me was JMS like a communication protocol, and he had bigger plans because there were lots of traffic went through 101. And in my project was JMS like a no notification service, not like, the... not like 101. But what Rüdiger is doing still? Is still hacking JMS at 101, or?
No. So we lost a bit of the contact after I left the company, and I met him. I guess it was last year in the summer, where I was with the family in Karlsruhe at some festival, and I met him at the festival, and then we had a short talk there, and he told me that he's now by InnoQ.
Okay.
And do there some consulting. So also I did I guess a well-known company.
Yeah. And what's interesting, a few weeks ago, I performed a code review, JMS. And what they did, they used JMS 1 completely from scratch again. Initial context lookup. And I showed them, it's like, yeah, this is nice what you are doing, but it's actually pointless. And I showed them, the the JMS 2, what it's talking about. Just, at resource JMS context, one-liner. And they were delighted. It's like, this is new. I'm saying, no, I would say about, this is 7 years old or something, and they say, yeah, this is really great, and they really like JMS back then. But what they tried to do, I don't know where they found actually the source code. It was completely, museum source, like 10 lines of code with lots of exception handling, and no one knew what happens behind the scenes actually.
I guess this is sometimes often the problem. I have the feeling that people just find something in the internet
Yeah.
and just use it without checking again if there's something new also, because I tried always to remember. I have really some time to check it really. It was when several years ago, I was on ApacheCon, and also the presentation of one of the maintainers from, I guess it was the HTTP client.
Mm-hmm.
And he told that still, I guess it was version 3 was often used because the people just find tutorials for this. And because of this, they just copy paste, and there are a lot more tutorials for the old version than the new version. And so they do not migrate to the newer version, even if the old is already out of maintenance or end of life. And so he always, whenever he has the opportunity, he tells the people, use the newer version. The old is not maintained anymore. There are security issues in it. It's not good to use this. But as told, because there are more tutorials for the old version, he told that more people use the old instead of the new version.
Okay, I also do a lot of copy pasting, but I behave a little bit different. So what I do, if I find something which interests me, I copy and paste and try to make it run. If it runs, I try to upgrade all the dependency and see something newer. And also, I try to delete as much stuff as possible and see how it actually works. And then, but if I just copy and paste and make it run, I always have a bad feeling because I have no idea why it runs. Right? So
yeah, completely agree. Yes.
So so then you started at SAP. What you did at SAP?
Yeah, it was they offered or they searched for somebody who is interested in Java and open source, and I was a bit to say curious and confused because during this time for me SAP was all this old big company which only does ABAP, and then because I was curious, I just applied, and then they told me during my application or during the first interview that they want to start a ODATA implementation in Java, and decided during this time to do this in open source, or they wanted to contribute to open source project during this time.
Okay.
And so this really sounds nice for me. And so Waldorf is far more closer to Heidelberg than Karlsruhe. And so I decided to take this opportunity. But when I then see a half year later, when I then joined at my first day, so it changed a bit during what we planned for during my interview, because in this half year, the colleagues tried to work in the already existing project with this project maintainers.
Okay.
But during this time, the person who started this open source project hosted it by himself. And also we got the license. It was a bit complicated. And then they tried to convince him to say, okay, we should move the project perhaps in a bit different direction. Also with the license, there should be perhaps a change. But because it was just this one person which hosted this, he did not agree. And then the team which I joined decided, okay, we should do it differently. We still want to have this as an open source project. And then we looked how we could do this. And this was then a bit during the time when I joined. And so we decided, as it was a bit of a collaboration with Microsoft, that we decided we want to start this as open source, but bring it then to the Apache Foundation.
That's interesting.
So
story.
That's not, we really wanted that no one person is in charge of the project and can do or always, it's all reflected to this one person. We really wanted to have a foundation behind. So that's not that one person can completely steer the direction of the project. And so this was then the decision, and was around the end of 2012. And then we had just to clarify regarding this outbound process, this legal stuff and all about. And I guess it was then March 2013 where we started as an incubation project at Apache.
Was the name
during
Olingo?
This time, the name Olingo, it was also there. We had several rounds internally.
But it was
to find a
Olingo,
good
right?
name. Yeah, it was Olingo. It was already Olingo.
And just a background. So what happened to me was, I think around the same time. So I got lots of requests, Java EE and clouds or microservices and service-oriented architecture, and there was constant, questions regarding, is there a standardized way to access backends? So, or because REST is a little bit messy, is there something else? And what I found was OData specification from Microsoft, and this OData specification from Microsoft, I liked what they did. What I didn't like, what I saw, because they were like a camel case wording. It looked like C# to me, not like Java, but everything I needed was already solved. So I liked what I saw. So I remember that. And back then, if someone asked me, is there a standard? I pointed to the Microsoft OData. And back then, Microsoft was really active in the Azure cloud initiative. So it was a completely different company than before. And the OData is like, how it's called, backend for front end. So you get a facade, and with the facade, you can query usually database. And actually, I think Microsoft, they implemented OData to have something like, queryable database or just CRUD through REST. This is how, this is a little bit simple, but this is far more than CRUD. You can invoke functions and stuff, but you could actually manipulate a database via REST with pagination and function invocation. So whatever you can imagine is already there, which is actually really nice and already solved. And what I like about that is it is backed by Microsoft, which is a huge company. And then indirectly, I found Olingo. So this is where, the story closes. And so now the question, now you should proceed. Why the name Olingo? What it means and why it's there?
So, meaning, so we wanted to have something starting with an O.
Okay.
And during this time, also with this O'Reilly books, we really thought we should take an animal. And then we started to search for something which has an O in and the animal. We first thought about owl, but then we thought, with this owl, this is more often used. We need something more unique. And then some of us of the team found this Olingo. So it's Olingo is a marquee bird, or I have to check the English translation, but some sort of a tiny bear.
Bear.
And,
okay, I didn't know
that. Yeah. And this is also the logo of this project. And then everybody liked this name, so we were doing this time the names on our boards. We had also some other ideas. And then we said, okay, this sounds really nice. This is not used, and this is unique enough. And then at some point in time, we decided, okay, we just name it Olingo.
Cool. And how big was the team back then?
Oh, during this time, I guess we were 4 developers. So it was a bit always changing, because when I started, also another colleague started, but then one of the team left because in the overall team, so a bit a bigger team, we were around 10 people, but some worked on the ABAP implementation. And also from our team, then some switched to JavaScript implementation. And so it was always that we were around 4 people during this time. And at the end, after, I guess, 2-3 years, we were only then 2 to 3 people working on this.
Okay. And you're still working on it?
No. To be honest, not. So it was several years ago in the meanwhile, where it was, so we started this implementation for ODATA v2. So this is also the specification or nearly completely, done with Microsoft and SAP together, but driven by Microsoft mainly. But this is still not an open standard. And then with version 3, there was a version in between. We completely skipped this. And then version 4 was then handed over from Microsoft to the Oasis. So that's an open standard and not belongs to one company.
Okay.
And also version 4 had some improvements, especially replacing the most XML stuff with JSON, or to have JSON as a second or the primary option. And then we started the implementation for ODATA version 4. And there's also the differentiation between Olingo version 2 and version 4.
Okay.
And so we started then this, and it was then to say, I guess around 3 years ago, where we said for us internally, it's feature complete. We have everything what we need. And then it was that we give it to another smaller team for maintenance. And there's currently 2 colleagues which are working on this, but in comparison to before, more regarding maintenance and doing minor feature changes.
Okay.
And
this
for
is
me,
which version isn't? This is Olingo version what? What's currently the newest?
Currently we have 2 branches. So the colleagues mainly work on version 4 because it's done for ODATA version 4 and it's more often used. But still we have users for version 2 and also some on the Java of the official or the public Apache project also often request for version 2.
Okay.
Especially, I guess you mentioned it, the JPA connection or the JPA extension, which is for version 2 more often used, and for version 4 we never had an official JPA extension.
Okay.
During this time. And for me, it's to say I try to help as much as I can help during my spare time. But currently, my family is growing, and it's hard between the kids and the very small kids to find the time to work on the spare time on this project.
Why SAP founded the project?
I was mainly internally during this time. There was the decision that most of the service should provide a ODATA endpoint, and also like you have described it. With ODATA, it's very easy to expose databases to the web. And so it was then that we had for some internal services or for our, also for the customer provided stack, that they could just activate this or data exposure. They had nothing to do beside of defining their data model in the database. And then they had already the rest the OData endpoints, which they can use, like we have described, a bit like REST, but with the additional SQL features.
Yeah, it is actually REST because there are minor differences. It looks a little bit different. Yeah. So instead of slash, you have brackets, but it is a really nice RESTful interface. I would say it's not like generated unreadable. It's really readable and is RESTful. And I think the SAP UI5 framework also uses OData, right?
Yes. So it was really also to have this standard to be used by all of the services, so that it's easy to have the UI just on top of this interface endpoints.
Yeah, and the SAP UI is actually really nice. So they recently at the SAP keynote this year, they made even all the JavaScript widgets available as dependency-free, dependency-free web components. Really easy to use, and they look great.
Oh, interesting. So even I have not known this.
Okay, yeah. We use it already in a Vue project. It's a nice date picker, and for instance, is a great and a grid stable. So it's a really nice project. It's called SAP UI5 Web Components. If you search for that, and you will find a GitHub project, which is looks really nice with a very small SAP logo on it.
Yeah, so I know some approaches this direction with the OpenUI5.
Exactly. And there's OpenUI5 Web Components called, and this is the new stuff.
So to be honest, so when I joined several years ago, SAP, I was completely not aware of that SAP doing that much of open source. And I'm really happy that I'm still working a bit in this area within the company. And I'm really nice to hear that also others see sometimes that SAP does some good contributions to the open source community.
I forgot actually when was it, but what I use a lot, it was probably 15 years ago or something. There was a MaxDB, and MaxDB was an open source database from SAP, and it was great with management tools, and I used MaxDB in some projects, but then strangely, I think it was bought by another company, this MaxDB thing, by MySQL or something. It was like a MySQL, hardened MySQL. It was called MaxDB. So this is why I didn't want it anymore, because I knew SAP does some open source work. Yeah. And what's also interesting, I spent a few weeks in St. Leon Roth, I think is the name of the place. It's like SAP University, and I teach ABAP internal SAP developers to understand Java. and I met then
Cool.
R3 developers who actually started SAP, who built the original R3 virtual machine. So this was actually the other really interesting nightly conversations how SAP worked back then behind the scenes.
Cool.
Yeah. So ODATA, what are you doing now at SAP? So is still ODATA related or completely different story?
A completely different story. In the meanwhile, I changed from the ODATA team to a team where we provided internally some messaging service. So back again regarding messaging stuff.
Okay.
Where we integrated an external hardware messaging solution into our data centers and provided this then internally on our cloud platform. And this was also around for 2 years. But I missed during this time a bit again the open source relation. And then also because we started then with AMQP as a protocol for some solutions for the messaging. And I also then during this time did some implementation regarding this AMQP and how we could provide this for our internal users as a library. And there I was again a bit in contact with the Apache Cupid project and used this, did also there some contribution. And then I decided for myself, I want to do a bit more regarding open source again. And then I got the opportunity, SAP internal, to switch to a team which should try to help the colleagues to use open source software in a most secure way with less effort.
Yeah.
And so it was then the project where I'm now in since about 1 year, where we will try to find solutions for open source or for known vulnerabilities in open source dependencies and software, and try to solve this or find mitigations for such vulnerabilities and provide this to the colleagues so that they, in the best case, do not know about, there was a vulnerability, so that they already get a fixed version of an open source component.
The interesting side note. So in my project, so what I usually do, so my projects are not like infrastructural projects, or more like, more boring business projects. So what we usually do, we just have the application servers and the actual business logic do not contain any external dependencies. So we don't have any dependencies, so we are always safe, and we pass all the scannings because there's nothing inside. And in some project they wanted to be funky, and they created their own jar with all the dependencies, and they never passed the pipeline because the scanner always found something. So it was actually interesting. If you can this is not possible in your case, but in my case, the solution to the problem is often getting rid of unwanted dependencies. So this is the best solution.
Yeah, this is also what we try to make clear to the colleagues, to really take care about the dependencies you take, and that you do not just take a dependency because you just find it. So really think about.
Yeah.
And also with open source, it's surely free to use, but it's not coming without any cost. So because you still have to check regarding some vulnerabilities or maintenance of the stuff.
And also whether the project remains active. So we saw many projects which are stale. So then what do you do about that, right?
Yeah, this is what we really want to improve internally with our project and our team. And also regarding, I don't know if you know the tool named Woolers.
No.
There was because it was also just, I guess, 2 months ago it was open sourced. Was also started Woolers.
Okay.
VULAS.
Okay.
So vulnerability scanner.
Okay.
So it checks for the dependencies which you have in your project. So it's Maven-based project. Yeah, it started as a SAP research project.
Interesting.
And they just, I guess it was 2 months ago, where they open sourced it officially. So it's now on GitHub. And I guess just last week or the week before, they officially did a step to bring it to the Eclipse Foundation. So really that's then also by a foundation. And we internally use this for scanning of our projects, our Maven Java-based projects, to see if there are some libraries in with vulnerabilities. And what this also does, or this is an additional option, it can also check regarding if the vulnerable part of a library is executed. So by based on static code analysis, as well as based on the unit tests or the tests you have in your application. It's really interesting. And the colleagues also, what was for me interesting, because they not only check the dependencies and transitive dependencies, they also scan the source code of the dependencies during build time to see if the fix is really applied.
Okay. And SAP is doing lots of Java internally, or?
And this always, when I talk with some colleagues, I always use this term of the filter bubble, because when I look around, I see a lot of Java developers. But I guess when I change the floor or the building, I would see a lot of other developers. So
okay,
at least it's regarding the cloud platform which we offer, really a lot of Java development. In the meanwhile, mostly, or not mostly, but often Spring-based applications. And yeah, in the other languages, I guess JavaScript, and also because of the trend regarding Kubernetes and also the backing services regarding Kubernetes, I heard more and more that colleagues using Go as a language.
Okay, interesting. So back to Olingo. So I played with Olingo a bit recently. And what I found is that it is a library, but it could be really well integrated with Jakarta or MicroProfile. This is what you usually do. And what I try to find, from Olingo page is really hard to find where the source code lives. So probably a hint to your developers, they should expose a little bit more, if you want to contribute, go to this, GitHub project, for instance. And this was for me really hard to find. So, and if you think about this, I mean, this ODATA or Olingo comprises two parts: the metadata part, and the second part is, I would call it, execution part, right? So if you can query the service or give me the metadata, and you have the metadata, you can perform the queries, right?
Yes.
And if you think about this is actually, it could be completely seamlessly integrated with MicroProfile or Jakarta without any plumbing, because it would be sufficient, for instance, to point Olingo to a database table and nothing else. And then if you have JDBC, you have everything. So the whole metadata is just, one-to-one could be exposed as, with a little bit of mapping, as Olingo metadata. So you could improve the usability a lot. So I did a little bit by hand just to see, what happens behind the scenes, and then got the idea, okay, one-to-one first. And even better, if you have JPA, you could actually use reflection. This is what I did, and just, go to the JPA entity and use reflection, or use the metadata from JPA and just expose the metadata directly. And this would be crazy, because then, you could just put a few entities to your project, and there's nothing else to do.
Yeah, completely agree. So with version 2 of Olingo, there's also this JPA extension which offers something like this already. The only the not so good part in the ODATA V2, Olingo V2, we had during this time the decision to have a servlet as entry point.
Exactly.
Which causes then some problems afterwards. So it was not the best decision during this time. And for the version 4, we also did a completely rewrite. So it was not that we take the code of version 2 and just update it to the new standard. So it was really that we try to, whatever we have learned from the old version, to improve in the new version. And so also the entry point is completely free if you want to start with a servlet or something completely different. It's all in your hand. The only thing, it was a bit internally. So I guess perhaps I should add a disclaimer at the beginning. So, but this is all my personal view, so it's not the SAP view. And also, I guess this is nothing confidential, because this Apache stuff is all in the open web. But during this time, it was a bit we started with the server implementation for V4, and Microsoft contributed to the client implementation. And also during this time, we had one colleague from Red Hat. He is, I guess, when I see the commits at some time, still active, because he had a different approach for the server backend or the server implementation, how it should be used. And then we worked together with them because we thought, okay, our approach is a good one, but he was convinced by his approach. And then we find a solution to say can have both approaches in the library itself. Just then you have to refer to another dependency, but the APIs are the same. And so it was then that we started with this and had this JPA implementation for V4 still in our heads to say, okay, this is then the first feature which we implement when the core is running. But then there was the decision that, okay, the core is running, we currently need no more features, and internally this JPA stuff is not really requested. And so we said, okay, then we should offer it to say to the community to do there some contributions. But we were during this time not able to merge the contributions in a stable way back to our library, to our core library. Okay. And so it's, I guess, in the meanwhile still, perhaps I have to check this, that there is for version 4 no official JPA extension provided by Olingo itself, but you find something like this on GitHub.
I don't even think JPA is necessary, because if you think about this, if you have JPA entity, it has to map to an existing table. And if you have Olingo, no one cares about the JPA entity. So you could directly point to the table. So this JPA is probably nice in a project where you would like to generate a table from a JPA entity, for instance, but it is not strictly necessary because of the architecture.
Yeah, so it was also, it was still during the times of version 2, where we started with this JPA extension. Also there's, just to check, there's an annotation processor.
Exactly.
Where we thought about, okay, you should just annotate your classes. And so it's completely independent if you at the end use JDBC, JPA, or just a file system, don't know. You have just to annotate your data objects, and then based on the annotations, the metadata and the endpoints are generated. And we started with this, but also there was then the decision, okay, and we should not further drive this because we have to implement version 4 first and then perhaps start with version 4 with some similar implementation. But because I was interested and want to see how this could look like and how this worked, so it was that I started also on GitHub an own project. I named it then, I guess Janos was the name. I guess it still lives at some in my repository and my GitHub. But where I really tried for version 2 to say, I want to provide these annotations, and this should then be independent of the way how you store your data or how you persist it. And I then started to have a JPA implementation as backend, and I guess I only did it then for JPA, but to have the core library, to have some annotations in the core library and be completely independent of the way how to persist the data at the end.
So I did it 2 proof of concepts. So one was JAX-RS based, and the other one was servlet based and used JPA. And I think the usability, the developer usability, could be improved as well, because what you have to do currently, you have to inherit from abstract ODATA application, and this could be absolutely hidden. So I think what would be possible, just to add additional annotation like, ODATA exposed or just ODATA, and this should happen behind the scenes. So, and then I got the idea, it would be actually a great idea to start, for instance, Eclipse microprofile project, use Olingo, and, just try to increase usability that way, that as developer, you will just have, let's say, with the microprofile config, you could add a connection to a database, and it will, and probably the tables you would like to expose, which is optional. It should expose all the tables, but you can override this, of course. And then you are ready to go. Then you can, then you have useful REST services for all your backend, and you can focus on the front end. And this could be actually interesting, because I get a lots of questions from my clients, what to do with backend for front ends and how to structure CRUD applications. Do we have to implement the same stuff over again, and there are lots of attempts in this direction.
Yeah, sounds interesting. So the only thing is sometimes a bit also when I explained before that I'm mostly working only work on my spare time on Olingo. It's sometimes harder to implement something like this in the evening spare time, and then it really feels.
Could we attribute something? So if I got the idea in my spare time and implement something, would it be accepted? So what would be the process? So how this could work? So the project lives on GitHub, right?
Yeah, it completely lives on GitHub, and also for version 2. So the best way perhaps to start is always to provide first the mail and the idea, or a very short conclusion or a summary of the idea to the mailing list. Because as told, I'm working for in the Olingo project, but I'm only one of the PMC members.
Okay.
Or even if I'm the VP currently of Olingo, it's not to say that I as VP has then more rights to vote. So it's then always that if some new ideas like this should be introduced in the core library, is then related to a vote for the PMC members. And then normally Apache way is that 3 PMC members have to vote positively, and there must be no negative vote. And if this is then happening, this can be integrated. And also the only thing which we always said for Olingo or for our versions, it always must be backward compatible.
Yeah.
This is also one of the reasons why we never removed in version 2 this servlet stuff, because we said, okay, when we would remove this, it will not work. So we have to work on a version where we can say we need a different option, how you have something as a starting point of your application. And then also there was some years ago where we said, okay, when we want to do something like this, we should start version 2.1. But as told them, it was always that internally we had the clear decision we have to work on version 4, completely fine. And was then also all of this stuff more related to, it must be done in the spare time of each of us. And then we never get it, or never started on this.
Okay.
But back to your question. So best starting point is asking on the mailing list, and if there are enough supporters, this can be started, and then based on the implementation, I guess if it's backward compatible, I guess it should be not that big of an issue if we add something in one of the newer versions, or if it's a bigger change, perhaps really we could target something like Olingo version 2.1.
Yeah. So what I'm just thought about, not the API at all, because it's a part of the standard, rather than just how to more seamlessly integrate that with microprofile runtimes, for instance. And this would be basically all Java e-service. And this is what I thought about, because the developer usability, or this would be like the tutorial would be condensed to a half pager probably. Just use this annotation and you are done. So this is what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, something like this should not be too complicated to add something like this.
Cool.
So based on the backward compatibility.
Okay.
But also can also, if you, because you said you already did some small proof of concept with Olingo, so feel completely free to share this with me, and then we can perhaps check how this can be integrated. And I can also then help in support regarding on the mailing list, so that we can have that we get the vote and enough feedback.
Yeah, and the initial, I was to say the main idea about this interview was caused by the last Airhacks TV, where an attendee also asked about Olingo and my idea about ODATA, and get lots of such questions. So, and then you tweeted something, and I say, okay, now we have to talk, because now we could do something about that. There are lots of interest at the Airhacks TV and from my clients, so probably something could happen, right?
Yeah. So also, this was where I heard it at the Airhacks TV. So I'm a regular listener or viewer of this Airhacks TV. And also regarding Olingo, I'm really open, or I guess the whole community which we have, or maintainers, are always open for improvement and suggestions. and also for collaboration. The
Mhm.
only thing sometimes is, to be honest, it's sometimes hard to explain to people that, as told, the most only work on their spare time on this project.
Yeah.
And then sometimes hard for, even for me, when I see, oh, somebody asked something on GitHub or created a Java issue, and it's again after 3 days, somebody says, oh, nobody responded, and I think by myself, oh, I really should respond, but take me perhaps a half an hour, and I find it's hard to find the spare time.
Exactly.
But
Yeah, this is
whenever I
absolutely
find it,
understandable. Yeah, because it is really
and
hard to write, a good email. This is how Airhacks TV
yeah,
started, because I
yes,
was not able to respond via email. This is actually mission impossible. And the Airhacks, I can show some code and explain that. And this is this was actually the reason that the whole thing started. And by the way, it is I think already 5 years old or something. It's crazy. So it is like and still questions left. So there, I thought, after 1 year I'm done, all questions were answered. But no, I get more and more questions every month.
I guess this is the advantage and disadvantage of the whole computer science and development stuff. So you can learn really every year something new, but sometimes you have really to learn every year something new. So it will never get boring. And I guess the questions will also never end.
Perfect. What we could do in future, we could have a session, Airhacks FM session with you about AMQP, right? And would interest.
So we can think about, but as told, or not perhaps as told, but I worked then on an AMQP implementation for our own internal messaging system in Java. And the contributions which I did then to this Qubit project was, I guess, 2 or 3 minor contributions regarding how the library could be configured, because there were some parts missing regarding HTTPS connections and setup of the HTTPS connection with some own certificates. Because of this, the project could not be used by us internally because we had no opportunity to get the certificates which we had internally into the bootstrapping of the Qubit library. And so we did there some changes. And the second was just, I guess it was regarding OAuth authentication, because there was also no opportunity to doing the establishing of the connection for AMQP to before get some token. And also there we add some some extension point, so that you can say, okay, before the connection is done, call please this extension and do something with the response. And so we did it that we added this extension point, and internally we just then created our own extension to say which first calls an OAuth server to get a JOT token, and then we set a JOT token to the header, and then the connection was established.
Okay.
So I guess.
However, so we could talk, about AMQP, or if you prefer about the scanning, whatever you like, we can do it in future.
Also, yeah. So I guess currently, so perhaps I can try to remember a bit more regarding AMQP, but regarding this open source and security stuff. So this is currently the main thing I'm working on.
Yeah.
Perhaps we could discuss a bit about this. So because
really
I'm currently really eager to bring this a bit forward within SAP. And also there we have some ideas to say, based on how it works internally, perhaps we can open source there also some stuff.
Yeah.
And so,
this will be more interesting. So let's do this in a few months. I will ping you or ping me. We will talk about security scanning.
Yeah, sure.
So perfect. So thank you. And where people can find you? Your Jonas or Janas project, what was it? Jonas, and what is your GitHub repository? Twitter?
So it's all related to Meebo.
Yes.
So you find me on Twitter with this, I guess it's then @1Meebo, because Meebo was already taken. And on GitHub it's just then Meebo, also MIBO, where you find my repositories. But to be honest, on GitHub you will not find that much. And also sometimes with my spare projects, which are just doing some proof of concepts or some minor stuff, I really have the feeling afterwards, okay, this should all be cleaned up a bit and to be done more, I would say, professional, or I should add at least some tests. But
no, this is the same with me. So most of my GitHub projects just experiments. It's absolutely fine. So thank you,
Okay.
and see you at the WJAX or
Yeah.
next JAX.
Yeah, surely. I will see when I get the opportunity to get there, because currently I'm more than at some Apache conferences.
Okay.
But I guess you are not that often at Apache conferences.
Okay. So thank you and bye.
Okay, bye.